From the outside, my life looked like a fairy tale, truly enviable. I resided in a stunning home that could grace the pages of a high-end magazine. Every room bore my personal touch, from the meticulously chosen throw pillows to the art I'd carefully curated on the walls, all illuminated by warm, inviting light fixtures. Visitors would often enter and exclaim, "You're so lucky," as if the very walls promised comfort and stability. My husband, Mark, epitomized dependability, a paragon of respectability. Friends and family admired him. He was trustworthy and dedicated, a man who had quietly clawed his way to success. He worked tirelessly, always claiming it was for us, for our future, for the family we dreamed of having. And he was right, his sacrifices had crafted the life we shared. In every way, he embodied everything I thought I wanted, until the day everything began to unravel. But as I looked around at the life we'd built, an ache had started to settle in my mind, something I just couldn't shake. At first, I tried to ignore it, brushing it off as just being tired or maybe stressed from work and daily routines. I had a career of my own that was doing well and a close circle of friends always just a call away. From the outside, it looked like nothing was missing. Yet under that shiny surface, I felt empty. I'd become too familiar with the shape of our life, dinners where we barely talked about anything other than plans and schedules, nights spent in the same room but feeling miles apart. Whenever I tried to reach out, to suggest a date night or bring up something more meaningful, Mark would just nod politely or say, "Sure, let's plan something soon." But it never happened. Each time I tried to reconnect, he would brush it off gently, like he didn't notice the gap that was growing between us. Our days started to revolve around logistics, errands, groceries, bills. But our connection seemed to fade, buried somewhere in the routines. I missed the thrill, the closeness, the spark that used to make us feel so alive together. Some nights, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out when we'd lost each other. How did we go from passionate partners who couldn't be apart to distant roommates held together more by habit than by love? Once, I tried bringing up couples therapy over dinner. Mark looked at me, a bit puzzled, like he didn't understand why I'd even bring it up. "Things aren't that bad, are they?" he asked, with a small smile, like I was just overreacting. "No, it's just. I think we might benefit from talking to someone," I replied softly, trying not to push too hard. But he only shook his head, taking my hand gently. "We're fine," he said, giving my fingers a brief squeeze before letting go. And that was the end of it. He saw nothing wrong. He was comfortable, satisfied, convinced that our life was just fine as it was. Meanwhile, I felt myself slipping away, my own needs lost in the life we'd built together. Around that time, we went to a charity event hosted by a friend of ours. We were mingling, moving through groups of people, me with a polite smile plastered on as Mark talked about his latest work project with a few acquaintances. My mind started to wander, and then, as I turned, I almost bumped right into someone. I froze, startled, and looked up into a familiar face I hadn't seen in years, my ex, Adam. Seeing him again felt like a jolt, an awakening I hadn't realized I needed. In a flash, memories I'd buried for years came rushing back. Adam and I had shared one of those intense, all-consuming relationships, full of incredible highs and crushing lows, something that left a lasting mark. We'd gone our separate ways a long time ago, but there had always been a lingering spark, an unspoken chemistry that even time couldn't fully erase. Standing so close to him now, it was like the years between us had vanished. "Long time no see," he said, his voice low and familiar, his smile sparking feelings I hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. We slipped into conversation easily, catching up as if no time had passed. He was as magnetic as ever, effortlessly charming, his presence drawing me in, making me feel like the woman I used to be. He asked about my life, about my marriage, but he was careful, his tone respectful. We didn't touch on the past, instead, we stayed grounded in the present, skirting around the things we didn't need to say. The connection felt immediate, as if we were picking up the thread of a story that hadn't really ended. The evening went on, and Mark, wrapped up in his own conversations, hardly noticed us. Adam and I stood off to the side, sharing a private pocket of familiarity in a room full of strangers. I hadn't felt this understood, this seen, in years. At one point, he casually suggested we meet up sometime, just to catch up. I hesitated, but part of me was already leaning toward yes, drawn in by the chance to feel alive again, even if only for a little while. With a spark of excitement, I agreed, convincing myself it was innocent, just two old friends reconnecting. Over the next few weeks, we met several times, each encounter filling a void I hadn't realized was so deep. We'd have coffee or meet for a drink, talking about everything from our current lives to memories we'd left behind. Conversation with him was effortless, it was as if he could see the parts of me I'd kept hidden. He reminded me of who I used to be, the woman who was spontaneous, passionate, and ready to take chances. One evening, as we sat together at a quiet bar, he leaned in, a soft smile on his face, his voice low as he asked, "When did you stop living for yourself?" His gaze held mine, warm and searching. The question lingered in the air, heavy and unsettling. I didn't know how to answer. Somewhere along the way, I had lost that part of me, the part that was brave, that wanted to embrace life fully. I had buried it, wrapping it in the routines and expectations that Mark and I had built together. As we continued talking, Adam's presence filled a space in me I hadn't realized was so empty. He made me laugh, brought a sense of life back to me that I hadn't felt in years. Then, without thinking, I asked if he'd like to come over one weekend, just for a casual evening. My husband was set to be away on a business trip, and it felt like a chance to escape the quiet loneliness of the house, to keep the conversation going. That Saturday evening, with Mark out of town, I found myself preparing the house with an almost nostalgic care. I poured wine, arranged a few platters of food, and adjusted the lights just right to create a soft, inviting glow. It reminded me of nights long ago when I'd surprise Mark with intimate evenings, hoping to make lasting memories. But this time, it was all for Adam, a thought that tugged at me, a mix of guilt and anticipation. Just after 7, the doorbell rang. I took a steadying breath, opened the door, and there he was, Adam, effortlessly put together, his familiar smile making my pulse quicken. Adam had brought 2 friends along, people he'd mentioned before, an old, tight-knit group from his years overseas, friends he'd reconnected with after moving back to the city. They introduced themselves warmly, bringing a vibrant, easygoing energy that instantly melted away any tension. Soon, the house was alive with laughter, drinks were poured, and that lively noise filled the rooms, breaking the silence that had lingered there for too long. As the night went on, the atmosphere grew light, relaxed. I felt myself unwinding, enjoying the company of people who knew me simply as myself, not as Matthew's wife or the one who had everything together. For once, I could be free to laugh, joke, and lose myself in stories of our youth, tales of wild nights in college, and memories from a time when life felt wide open, bursting with possibility. The walls of my usually quiet, restrained home seemed to absorb all that joy, warming up with the lively energy that had been missing. At one point, Adam pulled me aside, a playful glint in his eye. "You haven't changed," he said, his gaze fixed on mine. "You're still that adventurous, spirited woman I knew, even if maybe you've forgotten it a little." His words stirred something in me, awakening that daring, reckless side of myself that had been buried under years of duty and habit. There was a warmth in his eyes, a way he looked at me that made me feel truly seen. It was thrilling. The rest of the room faded away, and all I could focus on was Adam, his voice, his presence, the way he held on to those memories of who I once was. Then a song started playing, something that felt both familiar and distant, and he held out his hand with a playful grin. "Come on," he coaxed. "Dance with me." I hesitated, but only for a moment, before taking his hand and letting him guide me to the center of the room. His friends watched with knowing smiles, raising their glasses as we moved together, our steps naturally in sync as if no time had passed. When the song ended, I found myself still close to him, my heart pounding, his cologne lingering around me. His hand rested lightly on my waist, and before I had time to think, he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine in a soft, tentative kiss. It was subtle, almost a question, but it sent a thrill rushing through me that erased everything else. I pulled back, my pulse racing, but Adam only smiled, a mischievous sparkle in his eyes. He didn't need to say anything. The electric charge in the air spoke volumes. I glanced over at his friends, still talking and laughing in the other room, blissfully unaware of the moment that had just passed. For an instant, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something exhilarating and dangerous, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. The night rolled on, the conversations loosening, the laughter growing louder, and the wine flowing freely. At some point, I found myself leaning against Adam, his arm around my shoulder, our bodies close. The weight of daily stresses, the loneliness of my marriage, the constant ache of feeling unseen by Matthew, it all faded away, replaced by the thrill of the moment, by the feeling of being truly, vividly alive. It was well past midnight when the energy shifted again. One of Adam's friends, with a playful grin, suggested a game, something light-hearted and silly to keep the night going. We all laughed, letting ourselves indulge in the carefree fun, feeling that freedom that came with shedding our carefully crafted personas. The game grew wilder, laughter filling the room, each dare more outrageous than the last. I laughed until my chest ached, the kind of laughter that leaves you breathless, the kind I hadn't felt in years. Adam and his friends urged me to loosen up, to remember who I was before life got weighed down by responsibilities. Each mischievous look from him, every shared laugh, every subtle touch reminded me of the woman I'd left behind, the one who once craved adventure. Then, in a reckless moment, Adam took my hand, leading me upstairs, away from the others, his laughter echoing in my ears. He pulled me into a quiet room that felt worlds apart from my everyday life, closing the door softly behind us. That gentle click of the lock sent a chill down my spine. Faint sounds of laughter and music drifted up from downstairs, but at that moment, it felt like it was just the two of us in the entire world. He moved closer, his hand brushing my cheek, his eyes warm and understanding, the same look that had drawn me in from the start. I felt myself lean into him, my heart racing, voices in my head urging me to stop. But his touch, his nearness, the way he looked at me like I was the only one in the room, silenced every doubt, every hesitation. Before I realized it, I'd crossed the line, that barrier I'd tried so hard to keep standing, crumbling completely. In that moment, it felt like freedom, a release from all the expectations and routines that had kept me tied down. Adam's arms around me, his kiss, his familiar scent filling my senses, it was everything I'd been craving, everything I'd missed. The night faded into a blur of stolen moments, laughter, and whispered confessions. I barely noticed his friends, they were like faint echoes in the background, slipping into the edges of my awareness. I let myself get swept up in the thrill of being seen, of being desired, of feeling alive in a way I hadn't in years. When morning came, it brought reality with it, harsh and unyielding. The vibrant energy of the night had vanished, replaced by an oppressive silence. Adam and his friends left quietly, their casual goodbyes feeling hollow in the daylight. I stood in the doorway, watching them go, an ache of guilt settling in, heavier with every step they took away from the house. Once they were gone, I looked around the room, seeing the remnants of the night scattered like evidence of my choices. An empty wine glass on the table, a jacket draped carelessly over a chair, the faint, lingering scent of Adam's cologne, it all felt like it was mocking me. Panic surged inside me, a frantic urge to erase every sign of what had happened, to pretend it had just been a fleeting, impossible dream. I spent the morning cleaning, scrubbing every surface, straightening every out-of-place item, as though I could wash away the choices I'd made and rid myself of the shame that clung to me. But no amount of cleaning could erase the memory of Adam's touch, the thrill of his presence, or the gnawing guilt that had already rooted itself deep inside me. By the time I finished, the house looked as pristine as before, yet I knew that things would never be the same. I told myself it was a one-time escape, a reckless impulse I could lock away and forget. I'd bury it like a secret, move on as though nothing had changed. But deep down, I knew I'd crossed a line I could never uncross, and that knowledge haunted me, lingering in the quiet of the house, a reminder of the price I would eventually have to pay. As the morning light filtered through the blinds, it felt as though each remnant of the night, every stray glass, every mislaid item, stared back at me like 1,000 accusing eyes. The living room, which had been so full of laughter just hours before, now lay silent and still. Each object out of place felt like it was taunting me, a reminder of what I'd done. I moved quickly, almost mechanically, wiping surfaces, gathering empty bottles, straightening pillows. The scent of Adam's cologne lingered faintly in the air, clinging to my senses. I opened a window, hoping a fresh breeze might carry it away, as if it could somehow lift my guilt and shame along with it. Each pass of the cloth, every trip to the trash, felt like I was scrubbing away the night itself, as though by erasing the physical traces, I could somehow erase the memory. I kept reassuring myself it was just a momentary lapse, a one-time slip, nothing more. I'd been swept up in it, that fleeting weakness. It wasn't real, it didn't mean anything. But no matter how many times I tried to convince myself, I couldn't shake this heavy feeling, this sense that I'd crossed a line, that I'd let something dark and irreversible seep into our lives. When I finally finished cleaning, the house looked spotless, as perfect as ever, without a single hint of what had happened. I stood in the center of the room, scanning my surroundings, trying to feel a sense of relief, of finality. I told myself it was over, that I'd lock this memory away, bury it deep, and move forward as if nothing had happened. That night, though, sleep wouldn't come. I lay there in the darkness, weighed down by guilt, unable to escape my own thoughts. Michael would be back soon, and I ran through the smiles, the practiced routines, all the tiny gestures that would keep him from sensing anything was wrong. But I knew the hardest part wasn't going to be hiding it from him, it was convincing myself. Then, 2 days later, Michael arrived home sooner than I'd expected. His call from the airport caught me off guard, leaving me only an hour to prepare. I quickly fixed my hair, forced a smile, and steeled myself as I opened the door, greeting him with a warmth I had to summon from somewhere far inside. "Welcome home," I said, wrapping my arms around him as he came through the door. But his embrace felt strange now, almost uncomfortable, like I was a stranger in my own home. I couldn't shake the sense that he could somehow feel that something was off, even if he didn't know why. He kissed me softly on the cheek, his eyes weary but warm. "I missed you," he said, his voice soft and genuine. The sudden surge of guilt hit me hard, and I forced myself to keep smiling, praying he didn't notice my hands shaking. That first evening, everything seemed normal, maybe too normal. He unpacked, fell back into his routines, and I let out a quiet sigh of relief. I'd cleaned up every trace, there was nothing left for him to find. It was just a momentary mistake, a passing weakness. I could move on, and so could he. But the next day, small things started unsettling him. It began with the scent. I was in the kitchen, focused on dinner, when he walked in, sniffing the air with a slight frown. "Do you smell that?" he asked, looking around. "It's strange, like someone's cologne." My heart raced, but I forced myself to laugh, turning my attention to the salad. "Oh, it's probably from one of the new cleaning sprays I used," I said, hoping I sounded casual. "I tried a different one, it has a strong scent." He nodded slowly, though I saw a faint flicker of doubt cross his face. Thankfully, he didn't ask more, and I exhaled, feeling the tension ease from my shoulders. But over the following days, I realized I couldn't hide what had happened completely. It was as if the house itself was conspiring against me, dropping hints that I couldn't erase. The next morning, as he vacuumed beneath the couch, he discovered a watch, a sleek, silver timepiece, definitely not his. I froze when he held it up, his brow furrowing. "Whose is this?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes probing, a question hovering there that I couldn't stand to answer. My mind scrambled for a response. "Oh, that's probably from the dinner party I had with some of the girls," I said quickly, trying to make the lie sound convincing. "One of their boyfriends must have left it here." He didn't say anything more, but I could feel a shift. There was something different in the way he looked at me now, a slight suspicion lurking in his eyes, as if he were slowly piecing together something he hadn't realized was broken. In the days that followed, his questions grew sharper, more deliberate. He'd come home from work and casually ask about my day, but there was a new edge in his voice, a probing quality, as if he were trying to uncover hidden truths. It wasn't overt, but I could feel it, a steady, unspoken pressure building, the sense that he was searching for something, even if he didn't yet know what. Then one night, over dinner, he set down his fork and fixed me with a deep, searching look, his eyes dark and intent. "Is there something you need to tell me?" he asked, his tone calm but unyielding, leaving me no room for easy evasion. My heart pounded, but I kept my face steady, forcing a calm smile. "Nothing," I said lightly. "Everything's fine, Michael." He nodded, but the tension remained, hanging between us like an unspoken accusation, a rift that both of us felt but didn't address. He didn't press any further that evening, but I knew that something between us had cracked, our trust had taken a hit, and though he didn't know why, he could feel it. As the weeks passed, I became skilled at small lies, at holding up reassuring smiles, at saying what I thought he needed to hear. I convinced myself it was for the best, that I could keep things together, even if the weight of guilt never left me. But his suspicions didn't fade. He grew more withdrawn, watching me with an unfamiliar distance, as though he was trying to see through me, unsure of who I was anymore. Every time he reached for me, every time he kissed me goodnight, I felt the sting of shame, a reminder of the trust I'd betrayed, the web of deception I was tangled in. And yet, I clung to the hope that I could keep it hidden, that somehow, I could pretend things hadn't changed. But in those quiet moments, in the silence of the night, I could feel it slipping. The lie was unraveling, the fragile connection between us fraying, bit by bit. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the living room, holding the watch he'd found under the couch. He was tracing its surface absent-mindedly, lost in thought, his gaze distant. He didn't hear me come in, didn't notice the way I stopped in the doorway, heart hammering as I watched him. And in that moment, I understood that he didn't need details, he didn't need to know what had actually happened. The suspicion and doubt were already there, forming an invisible wall between us. He didn't need answers. Just the questions alone were eroding the foundation we'd built. When he looked up and our eyes met, I could see the silent accusation there, the unasked question he didn't want to voice. And I knew then that no matter how hard I tried to hide it, the truth of what I'd done would linger, like a ghost between us, an invisible barrier that would always keep us apart. Weeks slipped by, and the tension grew heavier between us, the silent accusations building walls in our once happy home. I told myself things would eventually return to normal, but every effort I made to close the distance felt hollow, staged. I had started to wonder if it was even possible to come back from this, if Michael would ever truly trust me again, when a single phone call turned my entire world upside down. It was Alex. His voice came through the line, low and urgent, sounding nothing like the carefree, charming man I once knew. Instead, there was a rough edge to his tone, a desperation that sent a jolt of anxiety through me. "Alex?" I asked, confusion washing over me as I tightened my grip on the phone. It had been ages since I'd heard from him, and the only thoughts of him I'd entertained were mixed with the guilt I carried daily. "Listen to me," he urged, his voice barely above a whisper, spilling out in a rush. "I don't have anyone else I can turn to. I'm in serious trouble, and I need your help." Every fiber of my being screamed at me to hang up, to sever the connection entirely. Yet, something in his voice, the raw fear breaking through his bravado, kept me rooted to the spot. "What do you mean, trouble?" I whispered, casting a cautious glance toward the closed door of Michael's office, where he was still working late. It's really bad, he said, stammering over his words. I owe some people a lot of money, people who won't just go away if you can't pay them back. I wouldn't ask if I had any other options. Please, just this once. My mind raced, reeling from the weight of his words. This was the man who had once been my escape, the center of my universe, and now he was dragging me into a nightmare I had never seen coming. I tried to think clearly, but each word he uttered pulled me further into the chaos, igniting a sense of twisted responsibility. I could hear the pleading in his voice, the way he clung to me as if I were his last hope. Against every instinct telling me to stop, I found myself asking, "How much do you need?" He hesitated before naming an amount that made my heart plummet. It was far more than I could ever explain to Michael, more than I had saved in any account. But I knew where I could get it. Michael had a safe tucked behind a bookshelf in his office, where he kept important documents and emergency cash reserves. I had seen him use it a few times, but it had never registered in my mind until now. "Give me a day or two," I said, my voice barely sounding like my own as I made a decision that felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else take the wheel. "I'll figure something out." The days that followed blurred together, a whirlwind of choices made in a fog of guilt and panic. When Michael finally left for work, I hurried to the safe, entering the code with trembling hands. My fingers hovered over the cash, a sum that could solve Alex's problems, that could silence the desperate pleas echoing in my mind. In that moment, all I could think was that this was the least I could do, a way to atone for the part of me that had remained with Alex, even after all these years. With the money in hand, I met Alex under the cover of darkness, my heart racing as I handed him the envelope, my chest tight with fear and regret. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mix of relief and something else I wasn't ready to confront. "Thank you," he murmured, taking the money without a second thought. "You don't know what this means to me." But as I watched him slip away into the night, a cold emptiness settled over me. I knew I had crossed a line, one that would haunt me in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. 2 days later, the truth came crashing down when Michael discovered the missing money. I was in the kitchen, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, when he walked in unexpectedly, his expression dark and unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, his gaze piercing, hands clenched tightly at his sides. "Where's the money, Claire?" he asked, his voice a mere whisper, yet it felt like a thunderclap. From the outside, my life seemed flawless, almost enviable. I resided in a stunning house, the kind that looked as though it had been plucked straight from the pages of a lifestyle magazine. Every room reflected my personal touch, the carefully chosen throw pillows, the art adorning the walls, and the warm light fixtures casting a gentle glow in each corner. Visitors often walked in and said, "You're so lucky," as if the very walls whispered comfort and stability. My husband, Ethan, was solid and dependable, the epitome of respectability. Friends and family admired him. He was reliable, driven, and a man who'd quietly achieved his success through hard work. He often worked late, saying it was all for us, for our future, for the family we might someday have. And he was right, his sacrifices had built the life we shared. In many ways, he was everything I thought I wanted. However, as I surveyed the life we'd crafted, an ache began to grow in the back of my mind, an unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. At first, I brushed it off. I convinced myself I was just tired, perhaps overwhelmed by work or daily routines. I had a successful career, and a close-knit group of friends who were always a phone call away. From the outside, it seemed like nothing was missing. But beneath that polished facade, I felt empty. I had grown accustomed to the shape of our life, dinners where we barely spoke about anything beyond schedules and plans, evenings spent together but feeling like we were worlds apart. When I attempted to reconnect, suggesting date nights or deeper conversations, Ethan would nod politely or say, "Sure, we'll plan something soon," but those plans never materialized. My efforts to bridge the gap were brushed aside with indifference, as if he couldn't see the widening chasm between us. Our days became defined by logistics, errands to run, groceries to pick up, bills to pay, but our connection seemed to fade into the background. I missed the excitement, the intimacy, the spark that had once made us feel so alive together. Sometimes, I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember when we had lost each other. How did we transition from passionate partners to mere roommates, bound more by routine than by love? I once suggested couples therapy during dinner, but Ethan's response was almost comical. He looked at me as if I'd just suggested a trip to Mars. "Things aren't that bad, are they?" he asked, a hint of a smile on his lips, brushing it off as if I was overreacting. "No, I just think talking to someone could help us," I said, my voice hesitant, fearful of pushing too hard. But he shook his head and took my hand gently. "We're fine," he assured me, giving my fingers a brief squeeze before letting go. And that was that. To him, everything was perfectly fine, while I felt like I was slowly disappearing, my needs getting lost in the life we had constructed. It was during this time that we attended a charity event hosted by a mutual friend. We mingled among guests, my smile fixed in place while Ethan chatted about work with acquaintances. I felt my mind drifting until I turned and nearly collided with someone. I froze, startled, and looked up to see a familiar face I hadn't seen in years, my ex, Ryan.